Clint Paddison, thank you so much for joining us on the Plant Trainers podcast today.
Super excited.
I know, and we've been joking around before we hit the record button because you're the jokester and I just try. But before we get into the funny stuff, do you have a moment of gratitude that you'd like to share with us and our listeners?
Yeah, I would just be able to be grateful for my kids because there was a good period of time where it didn't look like I'd be able to have children. And so definitely very grateful that I've got a lot of background noise in this recording.
Yeah, and we don't mind the background noise at all. A lot of our listeners are family people or were family people with young children at one point and now with adult children. So everybody's good with that. And it's actually, we'll get into that in a minute. It's wonderful that you do have children and that they're happy and healthy. And you'll tell us a little bit about that. But you used to be, or maybe you still are, a comedian. Do you ever leave? Do you ever retire from comedianism completely?
Comedianism.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
You know, I got into stand-up because I was terrified of public speaking, and so it was never something that I sought out. And so it's now almost 20 years since the first time that I stood in front of an audience and attempted my first joke. And that night was an absolute disaster, and I got no laughs except the very last joke I told. So 4 minutes and 50 seconds went by before I got a laugh, and I kept that last joke and then made it part of the next routine. And now 20 years later, still jumping on stage, but mostly just for corporate events. Public gigs I don't do so much because with the young kids I can't justify getting home at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. So, but yeah, here and there I still do it, but we're kept very busy these days with helping people with inflammatory arthritis.
So tell us a little bit about how that came into your life, how you are now someone who helps people with that issue.
Yeah, in the same way I didn't start out wanting to sort of do comedy full time. I wanted to overcome like my fear of public speaking. That's in the corporate world. That's how I got into that. In the same way, I had never dreamt that one day I'd be, telling people to eat quinoa. I mean, that's just not something that you'd ever imagine. I didn't know what that was. But I got into helping people with inflammatory arthritis, particularly rheumatoid arthritis, because that's something that I struggled with for many, many years and became very debilitated with that condition. Was on maximum dose of a drug called methotrexate, which is just the reason that I wasn't looking like being able to have children because it didn't look like I'd be able to get off that drug, both from a symptoms point of view and also from alternative therapy point of view. But alternative drugs also involve the use of methotrexate for government cost covering purposes, as you know, like with Canada, with your healthcare system similar to Australia. And so you can't just choose which drugs you want to be on if someone else is paying for them. And so it didn't look like I'd be able to get off that drug. And so I had this disease for many years, and it caused debilitating pain and inflammation in my body and caused a lot of joint destruction despite the medication and all my best efforts. But finally, after working at it for years and being able to slowly get the inflammation down through a plant-based diet, I was able to slowly but surely reduce the dosages of methotrexate and get off that drug entirely and become asymptomatic. And so I have a story that has been shared a great deal, and people can really connect with the story and the pain and the struggle and the search for a solution, and then have been able to connect with our program that we've put together and make progress of their own. And some people make tremendous progress, and I invite them on my podcast and we share their story and get the nuances of the way that they, implemented implemented our program in their life. And some people make a small amount of progress, but it's still significant enough for them to have an improved quality of life. So that's how come we have this business that we have now.
It's an amazing transformation of going from not being able to move to be able to actually fully function. And before we've talked about inflammation a little bit on our show, but we haven't really talked about it in a long time. And maybe there's listeners that don't know the difference between arthritis or rheumatoid arthritis. Maybe you could just explain that a little bit for us.
Yes. So if the diagnosis is rheumatoid arthritis, that's the one that is like 400 times worse than the diagnosis of osteoarthritis. Not to belittle osteoarthritis, it's just I got to give due respect to those people with rheumatoid and acknowledge that you guys are wearing the much worse cap because it's the autoimmune body's actively destroying the joints in a similar kind of, oh no, are you serious? And your heart drops in the same way as a diagnosis of something like multiple sclerosis. So we're talking about a kind of disease that one of my doctors said to me, of all the diseases I would not want to get, that would be at the top of my list. Okay, so it's that kind of, face palm, cry when you find out the diagnosis kind of thing, which people tell me frequently. They hear and they cry. So the difference is that with the autoimmune rheumatoid or, psoriatic arthritis, the body's, aggressively mistaking its own tissues for foreign bodies and it's aggressively attacking. With the case of osteoarthritis, there is an inflammatory component to it, which doesn't make it exempt from dietary changes and lifestyle modifications that can dramatically improve the quality of the future of someone with osteoarthritis. But it tends to be more considered wear and tear and even more old age arthritis. But it's all driven by lifestyle choices, there's no doubt. The autoimmune, though, is very, very microbiome related, very leaky gut related, and oxidative stress related. And the osteoarthritis is all of that, but on a much smaller scale.
Is there a way for somebody to know the difference? Like, how do they know if they just have pain in their wrist or their hand or their knee versus, oh, I have arthritis versus, oh, it's rheumatoid or osteoarthritis?
Yeah, if someone's worried that what they have isn't just, some worn cartilage, for example, and they're worried that it might be something immune related, then there's some blood tests that they can go and get done. And I literally just had a client who went and had these blood tests done the other week, and so this is fresh off the discussion, fresh off my mind. So you want to test for rheumatoid factor, which is an indicator of the presence of rheumatoid arthritis. There's another blood test called anti-CCP antibodies, and that needs to be tested as well. And then it's prudent to also get tested inflammation levels in the blood, which is C-reactive protein and SED rate. So with those 4 tests, you can normally tell, along with a physical exam from a doctor, whether or not your arthritis is likely to be rheumatoid arthritis or psoriatic arthritis or just, in inverted commas, osteoarthritis. Alongside those tests, often there's a symmetrical pattern with the autoimmune style arthritis. So inflammation in one finger on one hand can often also present as inflammation in the same finger on the other hand, or if it's in one foot, it's in both feet. So there tends to be this symmetrical behavior going on. Not always, but that also increases the likelihood that the diagnosis to the autoimmune variety will be positive.
So for people who have, I don't want this to sound bad, but I'm going to say an Instagram arthritis, like somebody whose thumbs are constantly killing them, that would be more of the osteo because it's just overusing those joints and creating some kind of pain there, or it would just be muscle pain, where if it's rheumatoid arthritis, and there's so much more, and it would be affecting more of the body than just the thumb. I mean, you started with a small part and then it very rapidly exploded, right?
Yeah. So people are going to know if they've got autoimmune arthritis. I mean, it's going to be debilitating pretty quick within a month or two. And they shouldn't ignore it, especially if they're feeling pain in their feet that doesn't seem to make sense when they wake up. And that's where it started for me. So the trends that I see is that for whatever reason, juvenile idiopathic arthritis, which is children who develop the condition, quite often it starts in the knees. I don't quite understand why, but you often see it in the knees. But with adults, it normally starts in the small fingers, the metatarsals, or metacarpals. So you've got the feet and the hands involved normally first, and then the other following fairly quickly. And so, yeah, if someone's just got a sore thumb from, swiping on Tinder, swiping too often,
I hope you're not swiping.
then I think that, they just need to, use the other thumb for a while. But if that thumb and the other thumb both hurt and then their fingers start hurting, now we got a problem, and they should get that checked out pretty quick.
Is it hereditary? Is this a lifestyle disease? Like, where does it come from? What causes this kind of thing to happen?
Yeah, so the science is still not in agreement on this, but there are a lot of risk factors. Okay, so obviously having a hereditary component doesn't help. But it certainly doesn't set you up for definitely getting the disease. I'm sure we've all heard, your listeners, a million times about how it's about loading the gun and the lifestyle's pulling the trigger. Well, that applies obviously to this as opposed to every other condition. But I'm going to share some things that are interesting that are unique to my perspective on this disease. So I help so many people with this condition, and I coach 550 people personally online in our support group, that I'm exposed to ongoing information coming to me in vast quantities, in as much detail as I request, and I can find some trends that are quite unique. Now, one trend that I see so often is that long-term antibiotic use is very prevalent in the history of people who develop rheumatoid arthritis. I would say as much as 20% of people claim that they had long-term use of antibiotics leading up to when they got diagnosed. I can certainly say that was my case. I took antibiotics as a teenager between the age of, I think, 15 or 16 and 20 or 21. In that, there was a 5-year period where I took antibiotics, and my digestion after that point was shot. So throughout my 20s, I just, really gassy and had like sort of indigestion, burps, and all sorts of unpleasant things throughout my 20s, and saw naturopaths and so on before I eventually got diagnosed with rheumatoid at 31. And it's a similar story for a lot of folks. And it's actually sometimes like mind-blowing how similar my story is to some others who report in their sort of, here's my history, kind of welcome to the group kind of thing. And they, it's like, wow, it's like reading my own story here. They took antibiotics as a teenager, or they had some case where they went overseas and they took antibiotics as an anti-malaria for a while, and they got rheumatoid arthritis a few months later, and so on. So that's one insight, is that antibiotics, if used excessively, massively increases your risk for autoimmunity. And of course, then you've got all of the classics that show up in other studies like diabetes, type 1 diabetes, where if you weren't breastfed or if you're a cesarean birth, these increase your risk factors for autoimmune as well. And so you've got those things going on. But here's something that people must accept, is that if we are just living a crappy Western lifestyle where we've got burgers and fries and we don't exercise, just that alone is enough to put us in a risk of getting an autoimmune condition. So there's no studies showing that there was any rheumatoid arthritis in Africa before 1960. Like, it doesn't show up in history. And so it is, whether or not, you could call it a lifestyle disease, I think that's a little bit, maybe a little bit too loose, but you could say that it's a disease that is related to modern living, and that might be use of antibiotics. It could be processed foods. It could be the fact that breastfeeding is not as kind of widespread as what it used to be as a really dependent requirement for the child. And all of these things, that modern living has made us more susceptible to developing autoimmune diseases, and that's why they've become just so prevalent.
So somebody has RA, rheumatoid arthritis. What's the normal protocol? Like how does it get dealt with? What happened with you? This is what I really want to know. You talked about that medication that you went on. How did you decide to change how you were being treated? Like, what's the typical protocol, and how does someone just say, you know what, I don't want the medication anymore? Like, how did that happen for you?
Okay, so there's so much in this answer. This is going to be like a fairly big chunk of time, right?
Take your time.
Okay,
Can I get a coffee while you talk?
You've thrown me a lot of bones here, right? Okay, so what happens when you first get diagnosed is, in my particular case, I didn't think much of it, right? I hadn't never been sick before, more than, I guess, like the flu or something. I was 31. I want to say probably a little bit full of myself, thinking I was just getting on TV quite a lot with my stand-up. You know, I was like, life was just too good to have anything go wrong, I felt at that point. So when I got diagnosed, I didn't think rheumatoid arthritis was going to be that big a deal. I didn't never heard of it. I was cross-country champion. I was sports captain at my university. I'm like, nah, it can't be that big a deal. And I've overcome other things, and I did all these Anthony Robbins seminars. I'm like, you know, I can rock it, no problem, right? So it dawned on me very slowly how bad the disease was as I actually started to witness my deterioration, and I started to see that things were very serious. And one of the big moments of, oh my God, this is actually really serious, was when I just took, because I was getting excited, and I probably went on the wrong train of thought for a minute. But I went to the rheumatologist. He told me how serious it was. He talked about the methotrexate, and I said I want 12 months. Or I said I want some time to see if I can work out what to do myself. And I said maybe there needs to be, I can change my diet and stuff like that. And he was happy to let me go and do what I want, which is kind of him, because a lot just say that you're kidding yourself and are more rude about it. But he allowed me some time. And I went away, and he said, well, at least take some painkillers because you're in a lot of pain. So when it occurred to me how bad this disease was after I took Voltaren for 3 weeks, which is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. The day I took it, because I'd never taken a painkiller, I don't think ever, certainly not in the last 10 years prior to that. And I took these strong anti-inflammatories, and the next day I didn't experience any pain. Like that was amazing, and I thought, wow. And like being so naive about drugs and about diet, I just thought, well, I just need to take these every day forever. Like I really did think that was the answer. Anyway, as 3 weeks passed, I needed more and more dosage to keep my symptoms at bay. And then I realized I'm taking quite a lot of these, and I'm still quite in a lot of pain. I'm just going to stop taking them altogether, these non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So the morning I woke up after not taking them the night before was the first most scariest day in my life, when I was in absolute agony. I couldn't put my feet on the floor without wincing. My arms didn't move properly. And I knew it was because I'd stopped taking the medications. But worse than that, I was so much worse than what I was just 3 weeks prior. Like my trajectory was not on path to have taken me into a situation this bad in 3 weeks. And then I realized, my goodness, those drugs actually made me worse. And it wasn't until much later that I confirmed absolutely those drugs made me worse. And then I couldn't get back to where I was 3 weeks ago. I was permanently worse. And so anyway, that was when I had a huge wake-up call. And I tried everything at that point with my, naturopaths, and I tried all sorts of things with hot springs and mineral baths and going to different countries to go into mud baths. And I mean, I really invested a lot of time and energy, as you can when you're only doing stand-up comedy. You have a lot of time. You're sitting around a lot, right? Because you might only work 2 or 3 nights a week, and the rest of the time you're either writing jokes or or researching how to cure rheumatoid arthritis, right? And so that's what I did, and I just didn't get better. I got worse and worse and worse, and I went back and I asked for the doctor for the methotrexate, and he started me off on the methotrexate, and that helped me reduce. I had about 30% of the symptoms after taking the drug, but I was still worsening, and I was still in a lot of pain. You know, my knee was terrible. So we kept continuing to increase the drugs, and I got to a maximum dose of methotrexate probably about 6 to 9 months after starting the drug. Now, to answer another portion of your question, you asked, so how does someone then start to think, I want to get off this drug? Or how do you even come up with such a ludicrous...
Because it's helping you and you're not in as much pain anymore. So isn't that the solution? Why all of a sudden would you want to make that change? Were there side effects that you want? Like, how do you come up with that?
Oh, Adam, I love this beautiful lead into the absolute nightmarish experience I had on methotrexate, because some people don't tolerate it too bad, but for me, it caused so much fatigue that I was like one of those zombies from The Walking Dead, where you're just walking around and you just don't even know you're walking into walls. So it was so difficult for me to operate that I'd need to nap often, and I was just really, really feeling this brain fog associated with my thinking and clarity. And the best way to put it is I felt like I was living, but I wasn't really alive. And that sounds extreme, and maybe not everyone's experience was like mine. In fact, I can say that I don't think others have quite described it so negatively as that. That's how I felt. I just felt like I was just in this, just numbed. I was like in that book, is it 1984? I was just numbed out of humanity, just to be on this drug so I could keep the pain lower. And lower, right, not zero, keep in mind as well. So here I am, I'm now numbed out of humanity. I'm really just like uninspired in life, and I'll never have kids on this drug, and it's still not taking care of all the symptoms. And so, and that's when normally people go back to their doctor and say, hey, the drug's just not cutting it. And that's when you upgrade, and then you upgrade more, and then you change because you're at maximum of some other biologic drug, and you need to switch biologic drugs. And you play the lily pad hopping drug process for the rest of your life. Seriously, and I'm not even, this is just reality, right? And I didn't even know that at that point, but I knew that I was going to have to go on some other sort of drugs, and the doctor, with a big grin on his face, God bless him, lovely man, best doctor in the world, but just representing, medical community well, he just turned to me and he said, there's plenty more drugs in the medicine cabinet. Proudly, he was very proud, right? And fine, that's good. There's been tremendous development in the area of biologic drugs in the last 15, 20 years, and it has saved the lives and improved the lives dramatically of so many people with this disease that in the past, when someone was diagnosed with this maybe 50 years ago, they'd be wheelchaired within a year or two. Okay, so there's no doubt about that. But I saw a different future for myself, naively thinking that, maybe there's got to be a way that can't be that hard. Anyway, it was hard, all right, but I didn't even know which way to go because there was no information online. There were 2 books published at that time on Amazon about people telling their story about how they recovered from rheumatoid arthritis. In fact, one of them was here in Australia, Freedom from Rheumatoid Arthritis was the name of that book, Sonia St. Clair. And then another book was written by Barbara Allen, who had reactive arthritis, but she became an expert helping people with rheumatoid arthritis, and she wrote Conquering Arthritis. So I bought both the books and did Skype consultations with Barbara, a lovely woman, and implemented their suggestions. And whilst I was trying my best, and Barbara's insights were fascinating and helpful, I just wasn't having the breakthrough that I needed. until...
approximately what year was this?
Probably year 2.5 after diagnosis. Yeah, something like that. And at that point, then I had what someone said in... So in our support group the other day, someone actually did a celebration reminding everyone of the following thing I'm about to tell you about, which for me was an awful experience at the time, but turned out to be a life changer for me. I had massive diarrhea and vomiting for 24 hours when I reacted to eating some imported, unwashed, pesticide-covered cherries. And, I mean, it was pretty bad purging, and I thought, I'm going to be in so much agonizing rheumatoid pain because I can't go to my beloved Bikram yoga, which got me out of so much pain every time I would go, because I was bedridden with this. Yeah. So for 24 hours, I was just, bathroom, bucket, bathroom, bucket. And then after that, the most miraculous thing happened and all the joint pain left my body. And I mean all, in the most mind-blowing way that you could imagine. If you imagine you've been in pain for 2.5 years and then one day you get out of bed and it's just gone and you haven't taken anything different with your drugs or anything. You've just gotten up and it's just gone. That was my experience from having the purging. And so, naturally I thought, all I need to do is just work out, how to achieve this without having to vomit every day of my life. And I reproduced the results 3 weeks later by just doing a green juice fast, celery and cucumber juice just for 3 days, got rid of all the pain again. Now, I don't know whether or not I've missed something, but wouldn't you guys also think if I empty my body of food and all the pain goes away, it has to be my digestive system?
Yeah.
Has to be, right?
Yeah.
Has to be. And so I couldn't see any other way that it could not be that. And so that's when I went all in. And that's when I made the choices to do as much as I possibly could to work on my gut health. And that's when I started buying books on enzymes and enemas and, gosh, just everything.
Have you tried it all?
Oh, yeah. Oh, enemas? Yeah. Gosh, number of times I've had plastic tubes in the places you would never think they'd have to go. Countless times. I used to do those at night so that I'd wake up in the morning with empty bowels because I found there was a degree of sort of reabsorption of toxins. If I had empty bowels, I would not have that experience. Goodness, yeah, tried it all, you name it. I mean, I was doing also things that weren't plant-based because I was still experimenting in spite of my intuition. You would go and see a naturopathic expert with the best reputation and they'd suggest something that you felt queasy about, but you'd do it anyway but because of the pain. I mean, I remember one time I drank liquefied cartilage from a cow. So we're talking about cow's cartilage from its throat. So we're actually talking about the throat cartilage of a cow, and I drank that, and it was so disgusting. I don't think I've ever had anything more disgusting, and dry reached and then threw the $200 bottle in the garbage bin. But I was just trying everything I could.
What about fecal transplants? Have you tried that? Can I go there?
So I no, I hit my wife up, but she wasn't real keen on the idea.
Hey, honey. Let's
Yeah.
Family shit.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, they've only become popular, or at least popular publicly, and awareness around that. I'm guessing, say about 5 to 7 years ago, and I would say in terms of being really sort of on the top of the interest levels in the last 2 to 3 years. So remember, I was diagnosed nearly 14 years ago. So it wasn't. No one was throwing me the idea of sharing their poo with me at that time. And
unless you were on stage and they were throwing it at you.
Right.
At the zoo, yeah.
Yeah. Ran out of tomatoes. Let's bring it to the next level.
Yeah.
So that would be awful, wouldn't it? In fact, I don't know anyone that's ever happened to, which I think is a good sign.
Probably.
We've lost his train of thought, and now he's just planning his next stage performance.
That's it. But the other day, my 10-month-old did do something similar to my wife on her shirt. So she may be benefiting from his lactobacillus. With regards to the fecal transplants, some inquiries that I've made to some local clinics here in Australia. First of all, it's expensive, and so they've actually kind of discouraged, which is strange for a business to discourage you to want to go and give it a go. Because I've had I've had clients that say, hey, should I give this a try? And my inquiries, they say, look, it just takes so many treatments to transform the health of someone with rheumatoid arthritis that we don't encourage it because I think that they think that it's not going to be effective for someone investing that kind of amount of money. Very transparent of the business to respond like that. But look, I know of some people who've done it and have had mild, if any, kind of results. But I know that it's more touted as a success for things like Crohn's and potentially colitis, ulcerative colitis may have more benefit. So I think there's great merit in the concept. But yeah, with the rheumatoid, there's so much going on. It's so complicated that potentially, you'd need too many treatments to make it pleasant.
So have you seen any differences in terms of males and females with rheumatoid arthritis, and particularly the hormones and how that affects the body?
Most definitely. So females are affected 2-to-1 to men. So you've got twice as many people with rheumatoid who are female than what you have males. And I believe that you're spot on, but I think there is a definitely connection with the hormones and as a potential trigger. We know, or I know, from people posting their daily or maybe every other day updates in my support group that when the monthly cycle comes around for females that they experience more inflammation. And it's literally like clockwork. And now other members are quick to remind that member that, hey, it's that time of the month and unfortunately there's more inflammation going to show up. Now, the mechanisms behind that are complicated that I don't understand. And but what we can say is that it is a real phenomenon. And I think that if you're experiencing more inflammation related to hormonal changes in the body once a month, that clearly there is an impact from hormones. Now, we also see that, you asked earlier about other triggers. Now, I spoke about the microbiome influences, like whether or not you were cesarean birth, antibiotics, all that sort of stuff. But another trigger that we see reported often when people post when they develop rheumatoid arthritis, it's very shortly after a childbirth, whether it be first child, second child, doesn't seem to be a big factor, but after childbirth. And we know that the hormones in the female body drop off precipitously after they give birth. So you've got this sudden change in hormones in the body. You've then got this enormous amount of challenge for the female as she goes through sleepless nights and demands on her body and enormous stresses if the baby's not taking to the breast or if the baby's not sleeping, and then family visiting. I mean, we know what that's like. It is a hard, obviously, and joyful time, but there are so many demands on the female that we often see rheumatoid occur shortly after childbirth. And so I think it's a combination, the perfect storm there, of hormonal changes and a very stressful time. And so, but definitely the hormonal impact there as well. So, yeah, and I do feel that this explains, at least anecdotally, a lot as to why women develop it more than men.
And what about other hormone issues like hyper or hypothyroidism?
Yeah, interesting. So when people develop hypothyroidism, an inactive thyroid, these folks obviously then are put onto things like thyroid augmentation medication. But having that condition, in my view, is not your biggest issue. The biggest issue or the biggest concern is having Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism, is that you're an increased risk factor to developing rheumatoid arthritis. And so I've worked with many people with Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism and said that to them and said, look, you've got what's considered an autoimmune disease, but it's on the light end of where things could go. Don't be complacent. Go a whole food, low-fat, oil-free, plant-based diet as quickly as possible, and you may be able to not only thwart having to take increased dosages of your thyroid medication, but you may be able to live a very happy, healthy life forever and not have to ever develop something much more nasty. And so, hypothyroidism can be a big wake-up call of, lifestyle mistakes or things we need to be made aware of, and a great opportunity to make some corrections to avoid something much worse.
Have you seen people with rheumatoid arthritis and maybe even hypothyroidism combined go on a low-fat, plant-based diet, find comfort, find remission, and then when nothing else changes in terms of diet, symptoms come back and they've kind of outlived the ability to keep it under wraps?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so I guess because I want to answer it in a certain way, can the question be, does anyone do really, really well and then they go bad again?
Yes. Sure, that's a good way to simplify it. I overthink things.
No, not at all, not at all. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. And so why is that the case? Well, there's, if I were to claim that I understood this disease perfectly, then, people should throw rocks at me because, this is a complicated disease, right? And but here is something that we know. We know that rheumatoid arthritis from the medical publications is heavily related to oxidative stress. And just for a quick recap on oxidative stress, you've got your free radicals being formed in the body all the time as a simple result of having your mitochondria converting fuel into energy. So just the process of generating just the process of basically metabolizing food and burning fuel creates some free radicals in the body. And then through our body's natural ability to counteract these free radicals with antioxidants, we keep everything under control, and we bring in antioxidants through our diet as well to keep things under control, to scavenge these free radicals. Now, what's been shown with people with rheumatoid arthritis is that they're in a state of oxidative stress, which means the amount of free radicals in the body are not being completely kept in balance, and that there is this case of cascade where proteins and fats are being broken down or oxidized by free radicals, and this can lead into inflammation. And that, where I'm going with this, is that oxidative stress levels, which can be measured, are a predictor of the inflammation levels in the body. So they correspond. So the amount of oxidative stress correlates to the amount of inflammation in someone with rheumatoid arthritis. Further to that, they've measured oxidative stress in some people prior to rheumatoid arthritis onset, and then found that rheumatoid arthritis has developed later. So it's a tool that can be used to, other than C-reactive protein and SED rate, to give you an idea of the degree of severity of someone with RA. And so I believe that when we get complacent and we're eating lots of foods that aren't as good as the ones that healed us when we were on our path to wellness, that oxidative stress, acid levels in the body, the shift in microbiome, our gut leakiness, all starts to go in the opposite direction again. And all the things that we did so well to get well then become slightly unraveled. And at some point that our body can start to then react to the foods that we're eating and react to the lining of the bacteria that enters our bloodstream through our gut leakiness.
So essentially that 10% difference that a lot of us see when we've lost the weight that we wanted to lose or got our skin cleared up and we say, okay, we got this now. We can have a piece of cake every now and then. It's all right to eat in a restaurant with oils every now and then. That little margin can really set off that microbiome enough within the gut and affect the whole body. And we might think we're doing just as well as we did when we found our happy spot, but really we're not. And the body reacts.
And I would say that whilst this might be a little bit appearing to be hypersensitive or exaggeratory, it is absolutely true for rheumatoid arthritis. And it's like living with a wild animal in your house. Let's say one day, like, you wake up and you're living with this wild, ferocious animal, which is, the metaphor for rheumatoid arthritis. So what most people do is they hit it with the biggest drug possible and try and sedate this wild animal so that it barely is barely living, right? But what we can do is that we can get to know it so intimately that we can control it. It's wild and it's ferocious, but if we can understand it and know what it needs and know how to keep it calm, we can live with it so that we're in harmony with this very delicate wild beast. But then the day we get complacent and we walk past it and we don't treat it with the same degree of respect that it needs, it's going to eat us up with no hesitation and just chew us to bits.
Life of pie.
Hey? Life of
pie.
Life of pie. Yeah, life of pie and life living without pie if you've got rheumatoid. So we are living the life of pie. Thanks for that. And this is why we can't be complacent. So you mentioned the oils at a restaurant, and a quick reminder about how detrimental they can be, because we talked about free radicals, okay, and we talk about oxidative stress related to rheumatoid. And when an oil is heated, its free radical potential goes through the roof. But when an oil is heated repeatedly, as they do in restaurants, it goes up exponentially. Okay, so we need to remember that if we're having hot fries from a restaurant, the damage that can do is far greater than any way that we could prepare fries at home in our own house, even if we used oil to cook our own fries, because it's industrial cooking in an industrial environment, multiple use oils, and the damage can be catastrophic. So, yeah.
So we should stay away from oil is what I'm hearing. What other foods should people with RA stay away from that cause a lot of inflammation?
You guys wouldn't have me on this show if I didn't want to talk about meat and dairy.
Well, right. So we do know meat and dairy. We know meat and dairy, but what about within the plant-based world? So let's do it there. So those people who are listening to this because they're not plant-based, why don't you give them like a little 1-minute overview, and then let's talk about some of the plant world foods that might be a little bit more detrimental.
All right. So if someone's listening to this and they're not plant-based, then come on, what are you doing? I was afraid to go plant-based because I thought I'd get even skinnier, right? Because I've always been a thin person. I thought if I lose meat, there's going to be nothing left of me. Okay. So, but what you realize pretty quick is that you then get to eat and indulge in your favorite foods like potatoes and rice and bread and all these things that, gets touted as being so bad for you. These carbohydrates, that are just so suitable to our digestive tract and suitable for healthy gut. Or basically, it's just isn't it? It's really just a compost heap inside us. And we don't put meat into our compost heap in the backyard when we're trying to generate fertilizer for the soil. If you want good bacteria put on the soil, you don't throw in a leg of lamb. It's going to create all sorts of horrible fermentation and rottingness and scavengers and rats, and it's just going to be gross. Okay?
Sucks, yeah.
So what we want to do is we want to have lots of lovely plants going in to create a nice little compost heap inside us. So get on the plant-based wagon if you're not there already. It's quite easy, and it's actually it's a no-brainer. Okay, so for those people who are already plant-based and they want to tweak things, if they've got inflammatory arthritis or their mum or dad has, or they just want to be healthier in general, then low fat, I think, is the key message here. So if we only had one argument that we're allowed to take, it would be low fat. Okay, so it's because the fat in the dairy, the fat in the meat, the fat in the oils, they're high. Think about that across the whole board. And there's 3 reasons that I, from a rheumatoid perspective, like to think about why it's bad. The first is the oxidative stress that we've talked about. So we know that if we consume higher fat foods, we get more oxidative stress. So we don't want that. We know from the studies, both animal studies and also human studies, that fat can increase intestinal permeability. Okay, so even if that is only for the period of time that the meal is passing through the body, the presence of the increased intestinal permeability means more potential pathogenic bacteria into the bloodstream, more antigenic proteins into the bloodstream. And so we just don't want to increase leaky gut. And then the third way, and I've said this in the wrong order, so I'm trying to think of the third way, is gut leakiness. Oh, it's the omega-6, omega-3 pathways. So you've got, normally in most high-fat foods, you've got more omega-6 present than omega-3. And so we've got an inflammatory pathway in the body with omega-6, and we've got an anti-inflammatory pathway with omega-3. And so if you've got more omega-6s, you've got more leaky gut, and you've got more oxidative stress, no wonder when we really dial down the amount of fat in our diet, we feel better straight away. And that's why if you go on a very low-fat diet just for a couple of days, people with inflammatory arthritis are going to feel much better almost immediately. I mean, I tell people that they can halve their joint pain in 2 weeks, and then that's conservative, right? That's like, I'm like, oh, look, that's just me watching my words, but you can do much better than that,
3
right?
days, yeah.
You can, especially when the first 2 days of our program is a celery cucumber juice cleanse. After 2 days, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Do you feel worse before you feel better?
No, and with this condition, that never happens with anything. If you're feeling worse, like what's that, like Herxheimer reaction or something, with this particular disease, that never happens ever. You only ever want to feel better, and if you don't feel better, it's the wrong thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And is spinach the rheumatoid arthritis kryptonite? I saw that on your Instagram.
Yeah. Spinach is my favorite leafy green, and I've had more spinach than most of the humans on this planet. I just like the taste of baby spinach, and I never stir fry it or I very rarely steam it. I just love it raw. I like the fact that it's contains its own enzymes, and it's just so rich in all vitamins and minerals. And I just like the fact that with spinach you can meet virtually all of your nutritional requirements that you would otherwise get from eating pounds and pounds of different vegetables and things. And this obviously goes for a lot of leafy greens. It's the powerhouse of nutrients is phenomenal, but it's the favorite food for our gut bacteria. They just love leafy greens. And so I just think it's that it's the nature's medicine is to eat lots and lots of leafy greens. So whether or not it's in a green smoothie or whether or not I'm just eating these baby spinach just like potato chips straight out of the bowl alongside my lunch and evening meal, I'm always eating some baby spinach. And yeah, I mix it up. Sometimes it's a mixed leaf salad and sometimes it's different things. But, that's my go-to. I mostly have that. So, you really can't eat too many leafy greens. And when I was really struggling, my bowls of salad were extraordinary. I mean, they were like, come over here and check this out, gather round and take a photo. This guy's a lunatic. I mean, we're talking about salad bowls that you would put on a table for a family of 7 or 8. I mean, it was insane. And, and I would fill that with sprouts, lots of enzyme-rich sprouts, and I would put in there some soaked pepitas and soaked sesame seeds and just had these enormous salads. So now they've dwindled in size due to my anti-inflammatory needs. But yeah, it's still a backbone of my health regime.
You're also sharing it with a family of 3 kids and a wife, so we get that.
Yeah, gotta share for sure. I'm telling you, Clint, I think that this is my favorite podcast to date. This has been not only enjoyable and funny, but really informative, really thorough. And I think that this isn't only going to help people who are listening or who know people with rheumatoid arthritis, but I think that this is just so practical to spill over onto so many other illnesses out there. And I really know that it's going to make a really great impact. If people want to reach out to you or learn more about what you do, where would you like them to go? PaddisonProgram.com is our website. They can go to /blog, which is where all of our podcast episodes are. And so just like you guys, we reach a lot of people with our podcast, and I think that that's the best place to start is just watch some of the testimonials on our podcast, whether or not it's a juvenile, young person with rheumatoid arthritis who's recovered, or whether or not it's someone who's at the other end of their life who's been on drugs for many, many years and is now feeling better than they have since they were diagnosed. I mean, the personal stories are what touches people and what makes them want to make changes. And I think that also so much content in the stories, that's where the magic is.
Amazing. We're going to link to that at planttrainers.com/309. We'll put all the links that you have. We'll put them there for people to grab from our show notes. Clint, thanks so much for being on the Plant Trainers podcast. We really do appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, so much fun. And next time we'll talk more about animus.
Awesome. Anything having to do with poop, I'm willing to talk about.
For sure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.